Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Real Science Exchange, the pubcast where leading scientists and industry professionals meet over a few drinks to discuss the latest ideas and trends in dairy nutrition. In this episode, we're featuring speakers from the 2025 ADSA annual meeting, and the symposia was titled Milk Pricing Dynamics, Strategies for Enhancing Milk Fat Production. And so was this a symposia or was this a panel discussion? Symposia, yep, and that took place yesterday. This practical session explores dietary and economic strategies to optimize milk fat production. The speakers will discuss nutrition, genetics, and market dynamics, followed by a panel on dietary formulation. So what I'd like to do first is kind of start off having you guys kind of introduce yourselves and then just kind of give a brief overview of the talk you gave at the symposia. Now, Adam, I'd like to start with you, but this is where I usually ask you to talk a little bit about yourself. What I'd like to you though is I'd prefer to know a little bit more about your mom, right? So I've heard quite a lot about her. I understand she is a fan of the podcast.
She's probably clicked more likes than most people, I think, on these podcasts.
I understand she's a bit of a critic as well.
She tells me which ones she does and doesn't like, and she unfortunately had listened to one with you and Dr. Weiss once, which she had some critiques on, but I had to tell her that you were one of the funniest guys I know. She thought it was a little bit of a dry one, that one, but...
Now, how much do I owe you?
I think I owe you a lot. So
you don't think she'll be tuning into this one?
Oh, no, she'll absolutely be tuning in.
Yeah, because
she likes Mike.
Yeah. She likes high oleic soybeans, I'll bet.
Oh, she's heard a lot about those. Yeah, but no, she does. She lives at home on our family farm still, and keeps super busy there and stuff. So
I'll look forward to maybe meeting her virtually one day.
Yes.
Yeah, yes. Good deal. Adam, tell us a little bit about your talk.
Yeah, so Mike and I both gave sort of two different aspects of thought processes maybe on dietary opportunities for promoting milk fat. So obviously my focus is more on the fatty acid feeding side, but I think we've all sort of started to understand better now the need to focus on multiple ways of promoting more milk fat, from de novo and from preformed, and we're not going to do it from one or the other. And keeping up with that genomic, that how fast that we're breeding for more and more milk fat is going to be something we're doing a good job with, I think, but there's a lot of room for improvement. So I talked about how we can maybe get more acetate, which fatty acids to feed, and there's more and more interest now on maybe effects of amino acids on milk fat, and I'll turn that one over to Mike. So.
Yeah. I don't want to get ahead of myself here. I was going to introduce everybody, but one of the conversations I had earlier in the week with someone is that maybe we're making too much fat, that it's causing a problem with the cheese manufacturers, and so how do we balance that?
I'm not. I mean, maybe for certain cheese manufacturers, but I mean, we're still getting paid for the yield of fat, right? So, that's going to go into certain other things. Most of these people are perhaps skimming that fat off for different purposes,
Perhaps
right?
That's the problem. They're not capable at this point in time of being able to skim that off.
Yeah, I don't know too much about that, but I mean, listening to Norm yesterday as well, milk fat's going to continue to pay well. I mean, and protein will. I mean, that's what most of our products are being used for the fat and protein.
Yeah. Speaking of Norm, if you don't mind, just introduce yourself and tell us what you talked about yesterday. And I saw you shaking your head there, so you may want to follow up on that question we just had.
New research is changing everything we thought we knew about choline's impact on the cow and her calf, and top scientists have a lot to say about it. They are presenting new research that supports choline as a required nutrient to optimize milk production, choline as a required nutrient to support a healthy transition, choline as a required nutrient to improve calf health and growth, and choline as a required nutrient to increase colostrum quantity. This new research is solidifying choline's role as a required nutrient for essentially every cow, regardless of health status, milk production level, or body condition score. Learn more about the science that is changing the game and the choline source that is making it happen. Reassure precision-release choline from Balchem. Visit balchem.com/scientistsay to learn more.
First, Norman St. Pierre, retired professor at The Ohio State University. What I covered yesterday is first to make people understand the change we've had in the way milk and its components are priced. And that was quite important. That happened in year 2000, and suddenly the markets, that is, the producers, started receiving signals that butterfat from now on was going to start being priced at a higher than what it had been previously. The second event that happened was suddenly when it was more or less found that butter is not bad for you. Margarine was actually worse. And so suddenly you had a substantial increase in demand. And that led to the butterfat prices that we have today. The U.S. is still a net importer of butterfat. But even if we were starting to export large amounts, there's nothing wrong with exporting surpluses. We do that all the time. We do that with corn, we do that with soybeans, and the fact is that is if we are a more efficient producer of those components compared to the rest of the world, we should expect that we should be able to export. That is good for the economy. Now, at my role in this after that was to look, okay, with the current pricing that we have, or we've had for the last 10 years, from an economic standpoint, how interesting is that? Because my two colleagues here are trying to boost the production of butterfat, but if it was done in a way that is not economically sustainable, that would be an issue. Well, the base butterfat, what I call the strategic, the fat that would be produced by cows without trying to enhance their nutritional tactics, that is a no-brainer. Even in the lowest price of butterfat, highest price of nutrients, it has returned still $1.25 per pound of butterfat produced. The tactical is when you start adding things to the diet to get a response. The difference there is you have uncertainty in the response. And making decision under uncertainty is very different than making decision when you have all the facts on almost all of those. And I gave an example of that. And so the way it comes out is depending, if you do a pretty simple calculation that I gave regarding palmitic supplements, depending on what that number is, which is dependent on how much is butterfat price and how much is the palmitic acid supplement price, you're going to have different strategies to use in your herd regarding the amount in which cows will receive the palmitic acid.
Sorry, one thing I appreciated in your talk yesterday was that you assigned some financial value to the fatty acids that weren't going into milk fat, that they're going to support other things. Because often, palmitic is a good example of that, where people purely base it on, well, I paid this and this is how much more milk fat, but not take into account some of the other uses it can have.
And in ways are underestimated the economic value of those additional calories. We're talking here of fatty acid that have been absorbed and are not secreted in the milk. Well, they go in the animal body and they're used either to produce ATP or adipose tissues. And the reason I've just used what is the average cost of a unit of net energy lactation. Well, there are times in the diet formulation where you have sort of the rare unit of energy. As the cow is eating that much, she's still deficient in energy because fat per unit of weight contains so much more energy, you feed some fat. Those calories have a higher economic value. I didn't factor that in. So my answers were conservative on purpose. Because you're making decision on the risk, anytime you have something in there, use a more conservative number. So what you get as the outcome, you're a bit more safe.
All right, our next guest is Dr. Mike Van Amburgh from Cornell University. Mike, give us a real quick overview of yourself, and then what did you talk about yesterday at the symposium?
So Mike Van Amburgh at Cornell University, an unretired professor, or a non-retired professor. Yeah, and most of my talk was about, how we got to the idea that amino acid supplementation to high producing cows was actually eliciting a milk fat response more than a milk protein response. And quite frankly, that was a surprise to us. The strength of the response and the outcome was something that we never planned on, and then we had to go learn to understand why was a cow going to preferentially use those amino acids to make more de novo and more mixed fatty acids, right? So that's what I spent a lot of time on. A little bit about the genetic potential of cows.
Yeah. How well do we understand the mode of action behind that now, Mike? You said it was kind of a surprise.
There's reasonable literature out there now to kind of point us in a direction of what's going on, right? Upregulating enzymes, right? I think the interesting thing to me is if in the literature that's available, it would say, some of these essential amino acids like lysine and histidine, methionine, even valine, will stimulate the upregulation and the synthesis of the enzymes needed for fatty acid synthesis, for steroid-CoA desaturase, for DGAT, things like that. And that they're also involved in carrier protein activities within the construct of milk fatty acids, right? And that to me makes sense because, we talk about protein synthesis in the mammary gland, and historically we always said it was it was kind of a linear thing to milk protein, but in fact, everything the gland does is protein synthetic activity. So I think, we know enough now to say, hey, these amino acids are involved in these processes, and it's energetically efficient for the cow to do this, once she has this capacity to upregulate.
Co-host for this session's Dr. Clay Zimmerman. Clay, I'm assuming, were you able to join or set in on the session?
I sat in on part of it. There's a lot going on at ADSA, right? So I was there for the second half of it, I would say.
All right.
Yeah.
Do you have any good questions that went unanswered, or did you hear any good questions from the audience?
It was a long panel discussion, actually. So there were a lot of questions that were there. That's a good question. I need to think back on what was asked there.
Yeah.
See, if you hadn't been at the bar during the first half, you would have some questions.
Well, yes, exactly. Exactly. Yes.
I can ask a question.
Yeah.
I want to ask, it's mostly directed towards Adam. So whenever I hear you talk, or I hear Kevin Harvatine talk, you guys are always talking about acetate. Where does butyrate fit in this crazy thing? Since if you look at your triglyceride slide, right, your 22 primary triglycerides, butyrate's on more than half of them. So why aren't we talking about butyrate?
So that's a good question, and I've been thinking more about that lately because I'd been thinking we needed to get more butyrate. So butyrate is a key piece of that milk fat because of the fluidity issue. So it's always, I think I said 98% of it's on that third position on that SN3, and it's very key there. And if that's not there, probably some C6 or oleic acid. So Dr. Palmquist showed back in the 60s, I think it was his PhD or his postdoc work, about half of the carbon initiating butyrate, I think I'm getting this right, is actually from butyrate. So about half of that, but then every other de novo fatty acid is having acetate incorporated with it. So yes, there's probably a requirement for butyrate, for making butyrate to some extent. That's the initiator. But half of it also comes from two acetates, if I'm understanding or remembering that correctly. So do we need more butyrate? Maybe we need some more, but overall, I think we'd need a lot more acetate so she can keep, adding those on all the way up to C16. And it seems like she will go all the way as far as she can, or as much as she can, but then she has to have a balance here. But like when we feed palmitic acid, that mammary gland's switching the de novo she's making. So we always get more butyrate. And I think that's, again, a fluidity. So you get more triglycerides with some more palmitics on. So she makes a lot more butyrate and C6 and less 12 and 14. So I think butyrate's key. It is important. But I think maybe we need to look at ways to stimulate more acetate in general to do that. And that's where I'd defer to some of your thoughts there on, is that sugars, or if it is, which sugars is it, or do we have to focus that on the NDF digestibility? Or I think that's a very interesting next step.
Yeah, somebody asked me about that last night, and I spent a bunch of time in Ireland with one of my PhD students doing studies on their crazy good grass, right? And if you think about how that grass is constructed when they're grazing it, it's about 33% NDF with a 90% total tract digestibility. So it's it's incredibly digestible stuff, and about 87% in the rumen. But it's also about 25% sugar. So on a molar basis, when you think about digestible NDF and sugar supplies, you're going to be split actually on a molar basis, almost even on how much butyrate could be made, maybe some propionate, and then how much acetate could be made from that. And then, of course, you got this hemicellulose-cellulose ratio on that grass, which is also going to dictate how much acetate gets made. So I could almost make a case that we're going to have more butyrate out of that than we're going to have acetate, yet those cows are still making decent amounts of fat, right? So it's to that question, right? Because I'm trying to figure out, is there a relationship there that impacts how that comes together? All about the fluidity, but how does the butyrate get made, and does more butyrate offset the need for acetate someplace else, so that then allows for more milk fat, right?
So Mike, have those Irish diets, have you measured the rumen VFAs?
No, I'm trying to convince those guys over there to do that's again, you'd have to do the molar. You'd have to do the production, right? I don't know if anybody has a stomach to do that.
There's only ever been like 3 or 4 studies, I think, that have done that. Right?
Yeah, right, exactly, right. So I don't know, Clay. I would love to see that, because it does. It's like the person at the panel last night who asked the question about, or Emiliano who asked the question about the New Zealand pastures and how much fat they were making, right? So if they're not making a lot of milk, and those Kiwis down there, they put urea on that pasture every pass to the cow, so their grasses are 30% protein, so their sugars are lower, right? Where I look at the Irish, and those guys are 18% protein, but 25% sugar, so that gets inverted. So there's an energy relationship there, but yet he was saying, hey, those cows are 6% fat. So my brain immediately went to, where the hell are the precursors for all that fat under those conditions?
We say all that fat, but I'd like to know what the pounds or the kilos of the fat they're making, because 6%, versus 4.5% at 120 pounds is
right. 20 liters.
So a decent cow here is going to be yielding more. It will need more precursors.
Sure.
And those pastures are high in fat as well. It's probably some of the highest fat diets you see is on a lush pasture cow, right? So that's why I always want to deal in amounts, I think, rather than the contents. But
I agree.
But there are lots of, that mammary gland is so fluid in how it can do this, right? I think that acetate and maybe butyrate is a big piece going forward. Yeah.
Can I ask another question, Scott?
Yeah, guys, just to
I
have at
Adam
it.
here.
Yeah.
He's doing your job right now.
Well, he's supposed to, right? They like to say here that less Scott talks, the better.
Yeah.
So
Send his paycheck to him then.
All good. So one other observation we've made, I'm looking for Adam's input and anybody else who might know this. We've run some studies where we see de novos increase very nicely, but we don't see them extend to the mixed. In other words, it's like we can get to the 14, but we can't get them to do that last step and get to the 16 carbon. Any idea what would be stopping that, where we got very good de novo, but the mixed are just flatlining?
Well, that's an interesting observation. I'm not sure I've seen that. My initial thought of that is we don't really know what the de novo 16 carbon is doing, because we can't differentiate between endogenous, preformed versus de novo. So is de novo palmitic really going down in that situation, or is she just putting more of the de novo in and there's less preformed going in there?
Yeah, that's a good question,
Yeah.
Adam. Maybe that's probably the right way to think
But,
about it. But
yeah.
we see them basically the mix just flatlining.
Yeah, but this is on a content basis, right?
This is grams per
100 grams of milk, I'm guessing.
or on a fat basis, because
Yeah.
we've started to take your cue and start to rearrange that.
Yeah. So again, that's kind of, I think we have to be careful.
Right.
When people are starting to interpret bulk tank values now, I would tell people, well, your de novo could go down, but you might be making actually more milk fat,
Right.
right? So
Proportionately.
or yield of actual milk fat.
Right, but the proportional shift, you're going to dilute it out because you're just making more fat and it's coming
Yeah.
from different sources.
Yeah.
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 So your preformed yield's not going down, right? Is that right? It's the
Maybe.
proportion.
Yeah.
So
One of Kevin's students had a poster here yesterday where they're looking at, I think, like carbon labeled, to try and look at the de novo contribution to C16. And again, I defer back to Dr. Palmquist's, classic work where I think he used radio labeled back in the day. And I think it was, this was before your time as well, Norm, I'm pretty sure, right? So.
Oh, but you still go in Worcester in the field there and with a Geiger counter.
Oh, okay, yeah.
The carcasses are still buried out there somewhere.
Yeah, the shit and everything else.
But the it's around that 50%. But talking to to Kevin's group this morning, that proportion of de novo in that mix will change, I think, in different dietary situations. So, but I do, one part of my talk, I think one key reason why feeding palmitic is consistently increasing milk fat is that helps make more starts making more triglycerides in the mammary glands. So you're not getting a substitution then when it's, if you typically feed more 18 carbon fatty acids, she gets a bit lazy or smart, whichever way you want to look at it, and she put the oleic on and not make so much de novo. But when you start making more triglycerides, she has to carry on filling up those, and so that's going to drive actual more milk fat. I'm pretty sure de novo palmitic goes down when you feed palmitic because there's a linear relationship there. But but she chooses to make more of the shorter chains, which actually would spare acetate for other purposes at that point, right? Yeah, I think. Yeah. So you had that abstract recent today with the different lysine levels. What was your thinking there with specifically targeting lysine?
We were trying to do what we've done with everything else, set the histidine, set the methionine where we think it's supposed to be, and then titrate in the lysine. Part of it was a test on a new product. Part of it was testing our boundaries on what we think we know about amino acid supply. And we had the highest, according to Barbano, we have the highest lactose he's ever measured in Holsteins. Yeah, it's an interesting thing.
And that's a good thing because it's driving
Milk
production.
volume.
Yeah.
Yeah, milk volume was very high on those cows.
And that's not a good thing. The world doesn't need more lactose, and we don't need more water.
Yeah.
Right, that's not a
Okay.
good thing.
Yeah. But does it drive the solids as well, the protein and the fat?
So in absolute yield, the answer was yes. But like some of the stuff I showed yesterday, it didn't do it the same way, right? So like some of the to Norman's point, that's exactly some of the feedback we've gotten from our industry. Our cheese industry is saying, we don't want that water, we don't want that lactose, we want more fat and we want more protein. They are complaining about the fat, right, and having to skim it for some of those cheeses, but at the same time, they said they don't want to penalize dairy producers for making more higher component milk because that's what they always wanted them to do. So in the case of that study, that wasn't really what we intended, right, because we expected to see the same response we've seen in every other study. There was a caveat in that, though, that one of the sponsors wanted to see chromium fed in there. So all those cows had chromium. Well, if chromium does what I think it's doing, then you're going to clear insulin faster. Then you're not going to send that signal to the mammary gland to upregulate protein and fat synthesis. So the gland is going to default to pushing that carbon to lactose. We call that carbon balancing across the gland, right? Because we are learning enough about this process to say, okay, if we do this, this, and this, we can move the carbon this way. And if we don't do this, but do these other two things, we can kind of move it back another way. This was an example of, well, we didn't really want all that carbon to go to lactose, right? We wanted that carbon to be distributed back to the fat and the protein, but because we think the insulin was muted by being cleared, the signal didn't get to the gland appropriately, and so they defaulted that carbon to the lactose, and that's why, when Barbano says, "Why do you have such high lactose?" I said, "I think it's probably the chromium."
So I understand that a little from
But the yield, but back to your earlier point, the fat wasn't depressed, right? It just wasn't as high as we were hoping it's going to get to. The same with the protein. They just didn't go up. So the pounds, right, you just look at pounds of yield, they look really good, right? Those are 7.5 pound cows because they're making so much milk. But we didn't do it the other way where we pulled the lactose down, because if, that lactose on that study, I think was these are Barbano's numbers, 475, 476. That's on an anhydrous basis. Our other two studies that I showed yesterday, or at least I know one of them was like 461 or 462. I mean, it doesn't sound like a big number, but that's a huge number in terms of the amount of water that you're going to pull in there. So that was really telling to us that all of a sudden we could do something that changes how the signaling happened in the gland, and it's going to redirect how it uses that energy.
Yeah. But we have a fresh cow study with chromium, got more components. So it's interesting. I understand.
More components as a concentration, or more components as a yield?
I only look at yields. The content.
See, that's what I mean.
But the content's only a relation. Is the content of those is only a result of how much fluid milk and how many grams of components have been made in the mammary gland.
Right.
She's not making milk on a content basis, right?
No, hold on a minute. So if you take the study that I showed you yesterday, though, this is I think there's a different way to look at it, Adam. I took those cows. They were 91 pounds of milk with a 4-1 test and a 3.0 or 3.1 protein, right? We initiate our treatments. All of a sudden, they're still 88 to 90 pound cows, but my fat went to 4.6 to 4.7, and the protein went to 3.4, right? So I
did they make more?
Oh, hell yeah. But I didn't change my volume output.
Okay.
I just changed my fat and protein, right? Yields.
Yeah.
And the carbon on the lactose came down, right? And it redirected to those other components. So I think there's multiple ways for us. So that all of a sudden, they went from 6.1 pound a day cows to 7.2 pound a day cows without changing milk volume. That's really impressive, right? Because you don't necessarily just need the volume to get that component yield. And I think, and that's to Norman's point, that's what all the processors in New York State are telling me they want, because they don't want the lactose, they don't want the water.
I have to comment on something that's been said, because which is that the cheese processors don't like the increase in butterfat that has happened, that has been proportionally more than the increase in protein. And it's a little bit like a squeaky wheel kind of thing. In fact, if you were to look at any bottling plant, they have a surplus of at least of the butterfat that arrives at the plant. At least 40% of that has to find another way than in the fluid milk. The average milk contains about 2.2% butterfat in the U.S. And so either they make cream, or a lot of them sell it just as anhydrous butterfat. You can do what you want to do. A lot of that ends up in butter plants then. Well, if you have cheese plants and there's no butter plant nearby, that's the problem. They don't have anything else to do with this fat. Now, when the class 4 milk is less than the class 3, it means that the non-fat dry milk is priced at a lower price than the equivalent protein and lactose that you have in the non-fat solid on the class 3. At that point, as they don't about the butter fat, because if the class 4, they can buy powder and add the protein, dry skim milk, add that to the vat, and they're all fat and happy. And it costs less than if the fat and the protein had been perfect in the milk delivered. But in the era we're in right now, the non-fat dry milk has been priced higher than the equivalent on the protein and other solids of class 3. So if they use milk powder to enrich, it costs them money. And that's the part they don't like. Also, even if you have the centrifuge, you have nothing else to do with the fat. And so the only way you can use the fat is by adding the protein from other sources of dried, and it's costing them money. At some point in time, the class 3 and class 4 will revert to maybe where it should be. That is, under the federal order, if things were working the way the founding fathers of the milk marketing orders had thought, it should be class 1 higher price and class 2 and class 3 and class 4, because that's the order in which you can, the time you can store those products. The markets are no longer working that way. And so we have had vast difference between class 3 and class 4. And what I have pointed out to people is what happens then, you end up having also some depooling. That is, the cooperative figured out if class 3 is so much higher than class 4, I don't pool that, and I will only have to pay basically close to the equivalent of class 4. They make money on the back of their own producers. Now, you would think if it works well, it goes through the co-op, it should return back as dividends. Well, it's like sending $1 to Washington, D.C. and expecting that dollar to come back in your pocket. Ain't going to happen. And this is what we've lived through, especially in the last 6 years. Some aberrant numbers, and the depooling at times, you would look at the amount of cheese in class 3 made in Wisconsin. If you look at the class 3 that was declared and pooled by the cooperative, you would say they don't know how to make cheese in Wisconsin anymore. Some other times, California makes about 35% of the butter in the United States. If you look at how much was in class 4, almost nothing. It's like they don't know how to make butter. And that's part of the problem that you have on the economic side of the components. You think producers are paid for components, because you see that on the check, how many pounds of this and how many pounds. All that gets reconciled in the producer price differential, the PPD. The producers lost somewhere around $800 million in a period of a year in the form of payment because of government intervention.
Yeah. And there was that, sorry, so was that part of the reason why from June 1, we had that restructuring of the pricing system?
That was long overdue. And the main driver there is what you have in the formula. You have what is called a make allowance. That is what in the formula it's estimated how much does it cost a processor to take milk and put it in the form of a product. Because you take the product, you take butter price, and you're going to calculate what is the value of the butter fat. Well, you have to take out from the butter price how much it costs to make the butter. Well, these numbers hadn't been updated for 18 years. And so that was also part of the problem. If you put it and the make allowance are too small, it means if I'm a butter maker, I'm never going to pool it, because if I pool it, guarantees me I'm going to lose money. And so those numbers had to be updated. And they did. And so that's part of the reason why, using the current formula starting in June 1st, producers are losing using the new, apparently losing using the new formula, but what it should do is you're going to have more milk being pooled. So they were losing it differently before. It gets somewhat complicated, but when you think of it, I was at a conference and I said the real solution out of this is get the government on pricing milk. And there's no reason. The old reason was you had small producers, tons of different cooperatives, and it was a way of apportioning the benefits of the markets in class 1. And this is gone. There's no reason people say milk is perishable. Well, what about tomatoes and lettuce? Well, tomatoes, you can make tomato sauce. Well, milk, you can make cheese, butter, and powder. Lettuce, you cannot do anything to store lettuce. There's not a head of lettuce going on in the ground in the Salinas Valley unless they know when the head will be pulled out. They already have a market. We don't have that market coordination in dairy because we have a federal milk marketing order. And we've missed a golden opportunity to just get out of this mess. The class one, the fluid milk, is not what is driving the growth of the dairy industry. It has sort of stabilized, but somewhere, no, you have less than 10% of the butter fat produced in the country that ends up in the milk container, and only about 18% of the other solids. So to me, it was an opportunity that was missed, and maybe in my lifetime I will see that system being going and have the cooperative doing what they should have been doing from the get-go. We're just in a complete different world. Milk marketing orders were born at the time you didn't have interstate highways. So anyway, kind of diverging from the thing, but what it means is if you look at cheese and how cheese is made at the plant itself, you literally have a linear programming, just like with simple the diet, and they have all sort of components beside the milk arriving as fluid that they can add on or centrifuge and things. It is not your grandfather cheese plant.
So I have a question for Mike, if we've got time. And it's a bit of a plug for High Ears podcast tomorrow, I guess. But we showed that first time the lower and higher MP data yesterday. And that was done without, I think, more of a broad, I think with a good quality blood meal and some supplements. So is it really 2 or 3 amino acids that are the key, or do we need to be thinking bigger picture than that? Because this is not my area, right? So interested in your thoughts on.
Oh, yeah. No, MP is a good way to think of it, right? But MP is a coarse way to figure out how to get all of the essential amino acids where we need them to be, right? That's part of the problem. So, but to your point, Adam, I think it's both, right? We have learned, maybe it depends on which stage of the lactation cycle we're working in. We're probably underestimating the MP requirements for early lactation cows, right? And we've got enough evidence for, from some of the work that Bill Weiss and Tebby did, and some of this work that's been done at Cornell now, that, and some of the work that came out of Europe, where we looked at either higher MP supplies or, all essential or all amino acids. And every time we do that, we get, 3, 4, 5 kilos of milk, right? 9, 10 pounds. So when you think about all the regulatory functions that are going on, meeting all the needs of the cow, she probably could use more of those. And the question is how do we become more precise about it? Because I don't, it's a struggle right now when I think about how do we meet all the branch chain amino acid requirements. There are feeds we could feed to do that, but the next thing you know, we're back up at 18, 19% protein, right? Which is not what we all want to be doing. Right, but I agree. It's not just 1 or 2 or 3 amino acids. There's a whole category of, it's all the essentials and some of the non-essentials, right? I can make an argument that in Barbano's done the same calculation on that first study that I showed yesterday. He came to me and he says, I think you're short on proline. I said, funny, that's one of the calculations that we made the other day, right? Well, how's that? We're talking about non-essential amino acids being limiting in casein production because it's such an essential amino acid for casein synthesis, right? Now, that's a funny conversation, but yet, and then I talked to Jeff Firkins and he says, those fiber digesters also need some proline and it's just not very readily available in the rumen, right? So all of a sudden you start talking about non-essential amino acids in places where we never really think about it. So I think in the MP, in a gross way covers all of that, right? So I think that's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
You know what's fascinating, guys, that you're a bit younger than I am, but you
Not
still would
much.
appreciate that.
You were my TA.
We used to think about
I'm a lot younger.
about fatty acid and amino acid as just being used as substrate to make the components of the milk. And in my lifetime, what has changed is now we look at the biogenic activities of these components.
Oh, yeah.
The fatty acid before were just source of energy. That's what we thought, and the amino acid was just to make the milk protein. And now suddenly we're realizing, no, they have a whole lot of other things, both on the fatty acid and the amino acid. And to me, this is absolutely a game changer. And our students understand that. And this is where I think the advances in nutrition in the next 10 years will be predominantly made.
Yeah. And we're going to have to keep working on them because the genetics isn't slowing down, right? I mean, that's just going to carry on at such a steep curve. It's that's why I liked it. And when I did that, where are we going in the future? And I remember Dr. Bauman doing that for a talk a long time ago, just talking about fluid milk yield. But that example I gave yesterday, I really like because she actually was making more fat than she was protein. A lot of these world record holders in the past were, more protein than fat. So there's a lot of liquid, right? But just trying to think how, there's cows out there that are making that amount of fat and protein every day is kind of exciting. But yeah, I agree. This idea of
It is. No, suddenly nutrition is fun again.
yeah, crude protein. Yeah,
Says the economist.
nutritionist. Yeah. But crude protein, amino acids, fats, ether extract, which we've moved beyond, to fatty acids, right? Total fatty acids, individual. But I think hopefully in the future maybe we will have formulate diets to individual fatty acids like you're looking to do with methionine and lysine and others. I think we'll get there.
I hope so, Adam. I
Yeah.
hope we do it soon.
Yeah.
I hope we do it soon.
That's why I like almost by chance when I did those calculations at the milk end, that feeds back to what she needs to eat as well.
Yep.
So,
No, I enjoyed that part.
yeah. Not the other parts though.
No, I like
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
I like the whole thing.
There's
but
one slide of yours I thought was okay. Yeah. It was my slide, but yeah. The rest of it, blah.
That's not quite what I meant.
Okay. no.
Your mom will like it.
Yeah. She'll love my slide.
I was thinking more from a modeling perspective.
Yeah.
I liked when you put those numbers together. Right?
Yeah, I have to give Jose a lot of credit for that. He's our does the big data stuff. So no, I enjoyed all the talks yesterday.
Yeah. No, it's been a lot of fun, folks. I think we're at a pretty good stopping point. Unless there's something that you guys haven't covered that you really want to talk about, burning desire, Clay.
Our last call question is sponsored by AminoSure XM Precision Release Methionine, the next generation in amino acid balancing. With AminoSure XM, you can save up to 5 cents per cow per day on your methionine investment. Try it today and receive an additional 2.5 cents per cow per day savings with Balchem's limited time rebate offer. Contact your Balchem representative to learn more.
So, Nora, I want to ask you a question, actually. Well, make a comment, maybe. So this industry day that was yesterday at ADSA, was this the first time that's been done?
That was the first time, and actually it came in very late in the organization. I've been on the board of directors of ADSA, as president-elect, president, all that for 4 years. And I have said when we moved the journal into open access, it means anybody can read all these articles, whereas before, in the first year of their publication, you needed to be a member to get those for free. So a person in the industry, and it in the industry you have people involved in R&D, but you have people involved in the translation of the research outcome into practical application. The people who are doing the translation have nothing to gain in being a member of ADSA anymore, really, when you really think about it. And so I have pleaded all along is at some point we have to deliver something if we want to have this growing segment of potential members in the United States domestically to become members. And so suddenly, I think it's Mike Van der Harp who came up with the idea, well, let's have a day and see what happens. We cannot measure what happened. The room was absolutely full and people standing. But were these people at the meeting because of that event or because they had nowhere else to go? And so we don't know. But
I
it's
hadn't thought
certainly,
of that.
at least on an apparent basis, it was a success. We're going to let that run for a couple, 3 years. I'm out of that picture now, but I think the ADSA has a lot to gain in understanding the translators of the science, providing them with some values in their membership.
I think the other opportunity for those people coming here is that, especially in the posters and the abstracts, you're going to see new work 2 or 3 years before you're going to read it in a journal. Yeah.
If I'm a consultant, if I come here, it's not only the cost of the registration, I have the cost is that, no, you're here and you're paid. You still get your paycheck. If I'm a consultant, I come here, it's one less day of consulting. That's the cost. And going over the posters there, not going to happen. And so you need to find something else of a benefit, maybe in a shorter window. That's why we thought a one-day event like this, you can come in, you just lost 1 day of income, you can have a targeted program. It's a little bit like a Discover conference in 1 day and focusing on one or two given topics. I don't know where that's going to go, but my challenge, because if you look at the membership in ADSA, it has been declining. Well, there's fewer people in academia working with dairy things. Well, so where's the membership going to come from? It's either international member that would come, or domestically. What has changed is we have a whole lot more masters and PhDs working directly on the farm. These are the consultants. In the past, that was not the case. You had the bin knockers, and so the transfer is quite different. You have now large firms of consultant, and we have to be. I took the largest consulting group in the United States, and now look, there's 43 associates in that firm. None of them were members. And unless we find ways to provide them a value in their membership, we're losing the growth, potential growth that we would have in retaining those people.
You know, it's going to take a while too, Norm, to kind of build a reputation for them to know that you're doing this. I think if you were to do a survey with most of the nutritionists out there, they have no idea that this happened this week.
I agree.
Yeah,
it came out basically in April, which is the only reason I was invited as a speaker. You couldn't find anybody else.
Yeah.
So.
But it just takes consistency, and so I think it's going to take probably 3 to 5 years before you really start building a brand reputation for having this kind of content.
I appreciate that comment, but go and tell that to Van der Haar and the other guys who are still on the board. I'm done.
All right. Any other burning questions that you guys feel like you'd like to share? Pretty good. All
Fun
right.
as always.
Yeah.
You're going to have bourbon this afternoon?
We're going to have something. That's Steph's over there. She's not listening. But for our 4 o'clock, we're looking to have some truth serum. So,
Okay.
yeah.
That Angel's Envy that you
was
had
pretty
on
good.
Sunday night, I'd recommend that.
Yeah. That's not a bad idea. That's not a bad idea. It'd be fun.
Well, thank you, Scott, for the invitation. This is a really good initiative from your company, and I appreciate the invite.
Yeah. No, thank you. Appreciate that. Yeah. As we close it out here, guys, what I'd like to do is go around the table here and share with the audience 1 or 2 key takeaways that you think they should take from this conversation. Adam, I'm looking at you, so why don't you start for us down there?
Well, I think, as we've talked about, this is an exciting time, and we're starting to integrate things a lot more, so not just fat, not just protein, and I think there's much to learn or opportunity now, maybe on the amino acid side and the fiber digestibility side, to promote milk fat, as there is on the fat feeding side. And we've made a lot of advances, but it's exciting. And where are we going to go? In the next 5-10 years.
That is exciting. It's fun again, Norm.
The success on the farm today is butterfat and protein yields, period. All you have to watch after that is the new research done on the stimulants of those components. You just have to watch a little bit the economics of those. It looks promising.
Yeah, good. Well said. Mike?
Yeah, just to echo what my colleagues have said, I think, from my perspective, we're inching closer to the idea that we can start to manipulate milk composition during diet formulation in a way where we can finally be prospective and not reactive, right? And I think, to Norman's point, always got to work on the cost part of that, because it can get expensive. But knowing how to do that then in a particular market, if we can get it rewarded, then hey, if you're going to pay for this, great, we can make this. If you want a different fatty acid profile for your manufacturing, we can learn how to do that, right? There's a lot of potential there. So, yeah, it'd be fun.
Yeah, well done. Clay, going to give you the opportunity to sum it all up for us. Bring us home.
So I don't have much to add to what they said to summarize, but I do think ADSA picked two great topics for the industry day yesterday, right? The high oleic soybean is a really hot topic, and obviously, milk fat and milk components. So I do like this initiative. I think it will help draw some people. I know some people that were here this year specifically for this part of it.
Good.
So,
Yeah, and we're glad to kind of do our part to help get the word out there, and then kind of dedicated to doing that. So I want to thank you guys for joining us. This has been a lot of fun, as always. Some of my favorite guests here. To the loyal audience out there, thank you for joining us once again. Hope you learned something. Hope you had some fun. I hope to see you next time here at the Real Science Exchange, where it's always happy hour, and you're always among friends.
We'd love to hear your comments or ideas for topics and guests, so please reach out via email at anh.marketing@balchem.com with any suggestions, and we'll work hard to add them to the schedule. Don't forget to leave a 5-star rating on your way out. You can request your Real Science Exchange t-shirt in just a few easy steps. Just like or subscribe to the Real Science Exchange and send us a screenshot along with your address and t-shirt size to anh.marketing@balchem.com. Balchem's Real Science Lecture Series of webinars takes place on the first Tuesday of every month, with the top research and nutrition topics that will impact your business. We also include small ruminant, monogastric, and companion animal-focused topics throughout the year. Visit balchem.com/realscience to see the upcoming topics and to register for future webinars. You can also access past webinars and search for the topics most important to you.